Today I want to talk about aspects of the psychology of entheogen use. And I would argue that it's actually the psychology of entheogen use that sets these substances apart from illicit substances, pharmaceutical substances. After all, it's not the chemistry of these materials that makes them entheogens. It's something else. It's something that we bring to the experience. So entheogens are very much a psychological category as much as a pharmacological category. It's not like it's limited to tryptamines or phenylethylamines or aryl cyclohexylamines or whatever else. It's the way that it's used. It's the beliefs and the values that we bring to these medicines that makes them entheogens. So the same substance can be used in a number of different ways, of which the entheogenic way of using them is just one way of using them. But it is perhaps the most optimal way of using them. It is a very, very special approach to these plants and substances, these allies that we have. So, as a way of getting into this very complex and very broad subject of the psychology of entheogens, what beliefs and values we have in our relationships with these plants and chemicals, I'd like to enter into one place and go across to other places, look at different cultural contexts, different ideas, because there is no single relationship that people have formed. Everyone develops different relationships, and different cultures develop different ways of thinking about and using different plants and different substances. So I'd like to go in this case by looking at a myth, at a system of mythology of the Huichol people of Mexico. Now they're most famous for their use of the hikuri, the peyote cactus, and they're famous for the long pilgrimages they make to collect this sacred plant, this hikuri, the little deer, from this sacred place that is considered an origin point for the universe, a place that the universe emerged out of. So this is a sacred desert where this cactus grows. And the pilgrimage to this place is a return to the beginning of time, to the beginning of creation, to harvest this sacred medicine, and to increasingly become divine on the process. It's a matter of assuming mythic and divine qualities during the pilgrimage. So although the Huichol are best known for their use of peyote and the pilgrimage to Wirakuta, here is a Huichol yarn painting. It's done by laying yarn into wax, and it shows people around the sacred fire, the grandfather fire, Tatawari, a source of knowledge and illumination, a great benefactor. But what I want to examine is a less well-known strand of Huichol religion that has been described in an ethnographic collection by Barbara Meyerhoff called People of the Peyote, and it examines a strand of wolf shamanism in the Huichol religious worldview. So I want to go in and have a look at this wolf shamanism and examine attitudes towards plants and spiritual teachers amongst the plants by looking at this wolf shamanism tradition. The story goes that once the ancestors, once we were part wolf and wolves were part human, and we were wolf people. And the wolves, the ancestors, lived in caves, they had no fire, and life was hard. Now, these wolf people, their struggle was such that the deer god felt compassion for them and wanted to intervene and to help these people. So Brother Deer Brother Deer allowed himself to be hunted. So Father Wolf hunted the deer, and the hunt went for a long time. Eventually the deer was caught, and Father Wolf began to eat the deer. But as the deer was being eaten, he transformed into peyote. So there's very much an element of compassion and sacrifice. I can't help wondering that there's an element of the trickster here as well. So as the deer is being eaten, he becomes peyote, and in the process of eating peyote, the wolves gain great wisdom. So here's an origin story for a very, very sacred plant. So the wolves devour the deer becomes peyote, and the wolves gain great wisdom. So here's the peyote that the deer transforms into. Light levels aren't very good here, but there's a cluster of peyote cacti, the blue deer. When the wolves were illuminated, after a while Father Sun appeared to them and gave them the choice to remain as wolves or to become humans. So the wolves were offered this choice, and many of the wolves decided in their state of illumination to become human beings. So many of the wolves, including Father Wolf, became humans, and they learnt fire. They became friends with Tatawari, and they learnt fire, and they came out of caves and they developed this human way of living. But their kin amongst the wolves were still their brothers and sisters, and so Father Wolf established a priesthood, a strand of shamanism, which was about maintaining connection with our brothers and sisters amongst the wolves, keeping that connection. So the wolf shamanism process is said to be a process of initiation for about 5 or 10 years, and it's a graded level of initiation, working with spirit wolves of different colours, eventually graduating to working with blue and grey and multicoloured spirit wolves, and then finally working with this plant, Solandra guttata, known as the Kiri plant, a very powerful plant in the nightshade family. Working with this plant to learn wolf transformation and to be able to transform into wolf form and to go and live with wolves and to keep that relationship with our brothers and sisters amongst the wolves. So the Kiri plant is the intermediate in that tradition. So in a process that involves performing somersaults and working with the Kiri plant, people can transform after this prolonged process of initiation into wolf shamanism. They can transform into wolves and then learn how to control that transformation. So that there are depths with this power of wolf transformation that keep the connection to the relatives in the wolf world. And the Kiri plant also helps in contacting spirit allies amongst the various plants and animals. So here's a yarn painting showing the Kiri plant over on the left, and a number of animal allies on the right. So that's an entry into a particular cultural, a particular worldview around specific entheogens. But I want to broaden out now and look at some other parallel practices. And what we have here is some European plants, the Tropa belladonna and the deadly nightshade, and the henbane plant, Hyoscyamus. This one I think is Hyoscyamus niger. So the black henbane and the deadly nightshade. These were long used in European shamanism, what was essentially branded sorcery and witchcraft. So these witchcraft traditions in Europe, part of that, strands within those shamanisms in Europe, had to do with shape-shifting, animal transformation, and also flight. So you see here a couple of these plants in the nightshade family, the deadly nightshade and the henbane, and also some pictures from the early modern era showing what was believed to happen when people used the ointments and the potions using the nightshade plants, where the witches transform into animals and shapeshift. The werewolf at the bottom was actually caught only about 4 centuries ago, apparently caught in a Polish town. So I'm not quite sure what was happening there, but the transformation seemed to be very vivid. So one thing that the Kiri plants and these nightshades, they have in common very similar chemistry, and they're very closely related as well. They're both in the Solanaceae family of plants, and they have these tropane alkaloids that cause a kind of a very specific syndrome, a very delirious syndrome, an extreme hallucinatory state, an extreme visionary state. And transformations and visions of animals are very common in this state. So there's the Datura plant, which has some similar properties, similar chemistry. So that's an element that has to do with animal transformation and shape-shifting and relating to the natural world and feeling kinship and affinity and connection to the natural world. Being more than human, and this is a key part of I think the essence of the entheogenic, that the theos, that the divine is within. What that divine is hard to pin down, but it's slightly different to our normal conception of the human. It's something beyond, or extending out from, or it's an extension to our humanity and an expansion of our humanity. So we've looked at this this animal, this theriomorphic side of entheogenic psychology. It's also important that these plants often come from the ancestors. They're ancient, and they have a connection to the ancestors. They bridge the world, not just between humans and animals, but between the living and those who have gone on. So there's this connection to the ancestors, that through the plant we can access the spiritual world, and the spiritual world can have access to us. So the ancestral element in the entheogenic psychology is also very widespread. So these are representations of ancestors from West Africa. Now here we have a picture of Datura discolor, and it's a Datura that is used by the Zuni people. We have a Zuni rain priest here as well, who the Zuni rain priests have a particular right to the Datura plant. So not anyone in this society, not anyone is privileged to use Datura plant. It is a specific property of particular religious or particular fraternities within the society. But the Datura is believed to have grown from ancestors, a pair of twins, a male and a female, a boy and a girl twin. And what they like to do is to wander around the world looking at everything and taking everything in. And then they would talk about everything that they'd seen. So a lot of the other divinities became upset with these very talkative twins who knew everything that was going on. And so they got turned into plants. And so that they wouldn't continue to walk around. But these plants still have this knowledge, they still know what's going on. And so there's the possibility of divination, of finding things out, by ingesting this plant and participating in the wisdom of these wandering twins who knew everything and could talk about everything. So it's very important in divination, and it's a direct gift of the ancestors. In West Africa, the iboga plant is also believed to come from the ancestors. It's believed that a man was out hunting, and he died in the forest. His wife went looking for him, and looked for a very, very long time. She became very distraught trying to find her husband. But the iboga plant grew from the corpse, essentially. And so the plant became a channel with which to communicate with the ancestral world through the plant. So now iboga can be used to access this ancestral level, to reach to the ancestors. And it's a very common experience with iboga, strong iboga experiences, to have this sense of not only living through one's own biographical memory and going back to childhood and revisiting experiences and memories, but going beyond that to an ancestral strata. And it's quite widespread, the idea that plants come from the ancestors. So the kava plant as well, which makes people relaxed, sleepy, drowsy. There are many, many different creation stories for kava. It comes from very, very different stories. That comes from various animals, or it comes from there are different origin stories, because kava is spread throughout the Pacific Islands. And so lots of people have come up with their own stories or developed their own traditions about where the kava plant came from. But about 5% of the 100 or so stories about kava talk about it coming from the ancestors. And that soporific state, the relaxed, dreamy state, is a sinking to the level of ancestral consciousness. It's a tuning into the frequency of ancestral consciousness in some of those traditions. And there are stories in Peru of warriors who were defeated in battle. This is a painting by Pablo Amaringo of a warrior king who was defeated in battle. And he felt such compassion for others that they would not be defeated, they would not come to the end that he came to, that he decided that he wanted to be able to provide guidance, instruction, because he had failed in his mission, and he wanted to be able to help others. So there are stories of the ayahuasca vine growing from the burial place of this warrior. Of course, there are many, many stories of the origins of ayahuasca and of many of these plants. But this is this ancestral strand, this idea that it connects to the ancestors. So there are many, many different worldviews in which entheogens are used, and various different ways of trying to understand the really remarkable effects that come from connecting with these plants and fungi. There's a kind of an animistic energy to the consciousness of entheogens, where everything is recognized as being alive and sentient and salient. And so there are traditions of personification, of seeing the human in the plants, this bringing them into a anthropomorphic framework. So, for example, in medieval Russia, there are stories of the ergot being little beings, little dangerous beings that would crop up in the rye fields. So actual spirit beings, because ergot in its raw form is not as safe or as physically or psychologically friendly as its derivative LSD is. So it's there's a dark side to the raw ergot fungus beings. Not sure if you can see here, but there are these creatures coming out of the rye. And it's very very common to interpret the spirit beings as anthropomorphic. We have an image here of Mandragora autumnalis, the mandrake plant, which is one of the most well-known anthropomorphized spirit plants. So not only is it psychotropic and capable of producing spirit vision, but it also has the appearance of a human being. So it's very easy to see a kind of a doctrine of signatures here, a kind of the form of the human in the plant. And this is a very old cover of Carlos Castaneda's Don Juan, Teachings of Don Juan, in which this is almost comic book peyote, this mescalito. So as a poetic device, or a way of interfacing with some beings that are very different from us, it's very common to find this kind of halfway form that helps us, that mediates. It's like an imaginal form that mediates between our consciousness. And here you can hardly see it, but it's an impression of a tobacco spirit. And tobacco is very ambivalent. It can be seen as male or female in different traditions. There are different ways of relating to all of these plants as well, finding male or female aspects and working with them, depending partly on us and what we're prepared for and how we want to relate. And of course, tobacco is a very, very sacred plant as well. It's often overlooked, the potency, the power, and the benevolence of tobacco when used responsibly, when used wisely. So there's a lot of talk at this conference that I've heard about demonic possession, for example, and whether that should be taken literally or not. And my position on that is absolutely maybe. I don't see a utility in getting stuck down in seeing it as being one thing or another thing. But tobacco has fantastic properties for moving people through that space of feeling that there's attachments to them. It has wonderful insecticidal properties. A lot of organisms do not like tobacco, but I think for humans it is a real ally if it's not used in an addictive way, if it's not used with a frequency that becomes epidemiologically likely, probable, that it will be harmful for us. But it is a great plant and a very useful ally. So these plant beings, these spirits, have different personalities, and not all plants have the same personalities. Some are very interested in having fun, or doing work, doing physical work, or in teaching, or in revealing what's happening behind the surface of the world. Salvia is wonderful for showing what's just behind the veil of illusion, what the mechanics are, and some are healers. Some, that's their nature, their profession is to heal in different ways. And ayahuasca is wonderful here. It's a wonderful, wonderful healer, as is San Pedro. So these plants have different personalities, and when we see the spirit beings, when we relate to them as spirit beings, we're seeing different aspects for a kind of an intermediate, a way of communicating with what the properties are, what the intention of the plant is in its relationship with us. And I think relationship is very, very important. That I don't know that people... I don't know how people relate to these plants if they don't actually relate to these plants, if they can't actually feel them as kin, as having some kind of relationship, be it as a mother or a grandfather, an uncle, that there's some kind of... Each plant has a different feeling. For instance, San Pedro is often considered grandfather, a grandfather medicine. And when we look at cultures that have been using entheogens for a very long time, it's extremely common that kin terms are used, that the plants are brought into a kind of a kin relationship with us. So we're not just coming along and extracting something from the plant and then going away, but there's something that we have to bring to the plant and the plant has to bring to us. We're family, and we share and work with each other. It's not like the pharmaceutical model where people try to dematerialize the sacrifice that goes on in the production of a medicine. It's like, you don't need to know where the medicine came from. Just follow the script, eat the medicine. You don't see the tree that was cut down. You don't see the laboratory where the fungus was grown on agar and then extracted in vats. So there's an attempt in industrial medicine to dematerialize sacrifice, when sacrifice is really a very central part of the religious psychology, the religious mind. Sacrifice is central to... It's the mechanism for the work. And that is not to say that the sacrifice has to be... There are different levels of sacrifice. There are different types of sacrifice. And some are more appropriate than others. Some work better than others. So, but I'll get to that in a minute. The kinship and the reciprocity is really, really important. And so it's very interesting to see cultures where if the leaves of a sage are harvested in order to have guidance, to receive vision or healing, then perhaps some cacao beans are left with the plant as an offering, some kind of sign of exchange is present. The whole worldview of the cultures using entheogens needs to be considered. The actual entire holistic worldview. So, for instance, a power plant, a mother plant in a culture that sees the whole world as a mother, as Pakamama, as the Great Mother. That's really important, that it's in a whole worldview context, and to try to understand that relationship. Divination is an important element in diagnosis as well, the diagnosis of illness or the diagnosis of misfortune. And many societies don't make a distinction between bad luck, misfortune in business, physical illness. They're all part of one energetic disturbance, and they all need to be treated as one thing. And it's important to work out what that disturbance is. It's not always on the surface. Sometimes it needs to be approached laterally. It needs to be approached in a non-linear way. And divination is essentially a part of that. It's another way of finding out things that aren't knowable by other ways. Another way of thinking about it when we reach a kind of a blocked state, a dead end. So this is divination with coca leaves. See a shaman divining with coca leaves. And of course, Salvia Divinorum is now very, very well known. It's used generally in very quiet settings with a single client or a small number of clients. Disturbance is minimised. The leaves are chewed or swallowed, and the purpose of it is to gain knowledge that will help people, that will actually improve their condition, whether it be healing or misfortune or whatever. So it's really interesting to see it crossing from cultures where it's used in the treatment of energetic disorders into a Western culture that is keen on the idea of being able to score some marijuana, put it in a pipe, smoke it, and have a visionary experience from it, or have a kind of a trip from it. So it's a kind of a different context now. It's been moving, that for a while it moved into this situation where it wasn't really used for diagnosis and healing, but it was used to access other worlds, and I suppose to train, to experience new things, and to develop more understanding of the spiritual world. But it's quite a transition. Here, I'm not quite sure if you can see these, but these are a couple of salvia trips from people in America who smoked the salvia and just got into the sheer weirdness of it, which is very easy to get into when it's smoked, and especially when concentrates are smoked. But it's quite a different experience to chewing salvia and just waiting in the dark until you start to hear spirit beings talking. And you have a little bit of time then. You might even have a conversation before you realise you're talking to them. Because it's more gentle in its onset, it's more subtle, but it's also a lot deeper. And you don't have the instant knee-jerk reaction of, what, you're here and you've got a body attached somewhere. That's disgusting, get out of here. You don't have that immediate knee-jerk response from the spirits where it takes them a little bit of time to work out that you're not just gate crashing from another dimension where everyone has bodies. So it's another approach. But it's interesting, the journey thing, that people are looking for a journey. They're looking for an experience, a vision quest. Essentially, they're disoriented in the world, disenchanted in the world, and seeking that initiation into a life path. They want to see what their life path is. So the vision is a really, really strong driver, I think, in many Western contexts for the use of these plants. But it's certainly not the only use of these plants, or necessarily the best use of these plants. I don't know what it is, but I'm just... So yeah, the visionary context here is a DMT experience as well. It's all about just going into these wild spaces and going on these intense journeys into the very, very different realms, into the unknown, into the other. And certainly there's a long tradition of journeying amongst all peoples. There's this idea of going on a spiritual journey. It's so fundamental to religion, to mythology. Most of the saints or the holy people have had journeys into other dimensions to gain knowledge, and certainly the witches in Europe, the Italian, German, and French witches, and others were really. That was one of the things that they were best known for: the ability to spiritually travel using plants like mandrake and henbane. So that tradition has been very strong, because it does come to us quite strongly in the early modern period of Western culture. The idea of witches, and that this is a very strong thing. People believe very strongly in it, and it obviously had very powerful, very real repercussions for everyday life, the practice of witchcraft and belief in it. And obviously Christianity did not like that, the Church did not like that. And I don't think that rational materialism likes it very much either. But I'm sure they'll come round slowly to it. Flying herbs are very widespread. So here are a number of flying herbs from different traditions. The bacanoa is a kind of sedge used by the Tarahumara people of Mexico. It's believed to be stronger than peyote in some ways, and the rhizome is chewed in order to have spiritual travel. But it's not used very often because there's a very, very strong effect. And so people don't necessarily use it all the time. It's often considered sufficient just to have it on the altar. The blackberries, so that's the bacanoa. And these are Kool-Aid, the coriaria berries are also capable of giving spiritual flight. So in Ecuador, and actually throughout the Andes, these things grow as weeds. They're very toxic, but they produce sensations of flight, as do the Amanita muscaria. And there are a range of these things. So the idea of spiritual flight is really quite cosmopolitan and often associated with teacher plants. And we have a drive to go beyond what we know or what we experience every day, because we know that we come from somewhere totally mysterious and that we're going somewhere totally mysterious. You know, we're going over an event horizon at some point where we can't retrieve information from that very easily. It's very hard to retrieve the kind of information that we use to get through our everyday problem-solving lives. It's hard to get that back from the frontier represented by death. So we all see this point at which it's hard to learn anything, to know anything with any certainty. And so the idea that we can go beyond our waking and dreaming states into other states that are different, that we can traverse them, and that we can even come back, but especially that we can traverse them and remain conscious. It's a very, very great driver to explore consciousness. It's part of our terrain. It is part of our terrain, and it's good to explore our terrain and to know it well, to actually understand it. And the plants are very good for bringing us to the edge of that event horizon, for bringing us close to it, or even beyond it in some ways, and bringing things back that give us some understanding that perhaps we don't need to be in our body to be conscious, that we don't need, that perhaps consciousness is not limited to the body, which dies. And of course there are other ways of accessing other states of consciousness. There's dreaming and storytelling and ecstatic, just spontaneous ecstatic revelation and meditation. There are all these different techniques. But the plants are incredible allies in moving us beyond everything we know and taking us to these territories where we can become more familiar, more comfortable with the idea of radical consciousness change. That consciousness is not linear and stable, but that it's transformative and has many different aspects to it. The flowers here are the oliloquy. Oliloquy is a psychoactive plant, a kind of morning glory that was used by the Aztec and is still used by many Mexican ethnic groups, the Zapotec and the Mazatec, for example. And it is used for divination. The seeds are used for divination. The substances in the seeds are closely related to LSD. It contains lysergic acid amide, where LSD is lysergic acid diethylamide. And the effects are somewhat different, or more sedative, but nonetheless it's a very powerful trance state, a very useful trance state, and it was often used for divination and was considered very, very sacred. Now, for a long time it wasn't clear why these morning glories had alkaloids from the fungal kingdom, essentially ergot alkaloids, which is where we get LSD from the ergots. But in the last few decades it's been discovered that the oliloquy is actually the host to a fungus related to the claviceps that produces LSD in ergots, and it grows on the seeds and on the leaves. So I'm not sure if you can see this. These were described about 2 years ago as a new species of fungus, and they grow on the leaf surface. So on the inside of the newly opened leaves of the oliloquy are glands that the plant breathes through, and around those glands is a fungus that just lives on the gland and produces LSA. So it's only just been described. So there's all these amazing things to be discovered about the teacher plants. So little is known really. There's still so much to learn. And that these fungi produce the psychotropic elements, but they can't be moved to any other host. They're specific to this one plant species. They're so closely co-evolved. But this plant was considered so sacred that when the Spanish came into Mexico and tried to eradicate the values of the Mexican people, when it came in and tried to just decimate the culture and exploit it, people were given choices in some instances about whether they were going to betray the presence of oliloquy plants, and they often refused, even though they were killed for us. We're looking at a case of martyrdom because of the spiritual values, the religious beliefs and convictions of people. So again, in terms of religious psychology, this is a very, very religious emotion. This is a very religious mindset that you will sacrifice. Your values are they transcend the flesh. They transcend the day-to-day, the very survival instincts. These values transcend them. So yeah, there's a profound spiritual commitment to a teacher plant. So considering that that kind of commitment is not only possible but actually common to people who have relationships with plants. I mean, they're our kin. They're a part of us. It's not only possible to have that connection to plants, but it's very common. The idea that you can legislate against that kind of relationship is well, barbaric, but also absurd. I mean, people will not. They will not. They will stand with those plants. Not that I'm encouraging that kind of behaviour, but people have. Historically, they have. And it's partly because of the gifts that we get from these plants, the grace that we get from these plants, the spiritual grace, the sheer gratitude that we can feel when we have ecstatic experiences of unity and connection. It is a great gift, and we do owe something in return for that. We want to balance that great gift. And to share it. I mean, it's natural that if we have a wonderful experience, we want to share it with other people, and that's part of the mindset of working with plants, and it is a spiritual mindset. In terms of unification, a lot of plants encourage the sense of connection and unity with the natural world. It's very, very common to find these very ancient Peruvian ceramics depicting San Pedro in association with animals, all kinds of different periods. But the connection with the animal ally, and with in the natural world, especially the animal world, is very strong. And the other thing too is intention. The intention of what is going to happen when the medicine is prepared. So the dream and the intention that goes into the preparation of the medicine, because it can be prepared different ways, and a lot of the factors go well beyond sheer chemistry. They go to the spiritual intention, the projection, the hope of the person making it. So the energy of the maestro goes into the medicine, and that's part of the plasticity of it, and also the intention of the person having it. You know, they're about to take this medicine into themselves. And their intention will shape the experience that they have. And a lot of the experiences are quite flexible in terms of what they will produce, and also very varied in the course of a single experience of what will happen. Often people need to get rid of stuff. Often people have stored impressions and pain and suffering and illness and bad patterns, and they just need to drop that. They really need to get that out of their system. They need to sweat it out, they need to vomit it out, they need to shit it out, they need to talk it out, they need to walk it out. They just need to get that out, and that's a really important preliminary. I find it very interesting that a lot of the plants that we relate to best as teacher plants and healer plants give us our hangover at the beginning and get that out of the way with, rather than giving us the hangover at the end of it. You know, it's a preliminary cleansing, and that's it's a gift. It's a horrible thing to go through, but it's a gift. And after that, we can become more integrated, more organised, more. The system flows. The system connects, because those blockages, those poisons in the system, the fault lines have been sort of smoothed out, and there's this clear flow of energy, this healing flow of dynamic energy. So in terms of the actual kinds of peak experiences that people have with entheogens, there's such a broad range of those as well. So this kind of blissful flowering state, you know, to be contrasted with the anxious state of almost paranoid, you know, eschatological revelation and you know, this some of the terrible experiences that people go through when they're beginning to process the energy disorders that they're suffering at the time. To be contrasted against the sort of bliss states, the samadhi states and openness states that people can get into. But even amongst that, there's some really strong distinctions to be made, and I think they relate to cultural approaches, what the culture's values are, and they're not always the same. You know, like Margaret Mead well, no, actually, we won't go to Margaret Mead, but there have been different approaches to whether people want to hold everything together, whether order is extremely important, or whether flexibility is extremely important. That these values vary in the way that they're prioritised in different places, in different groups, in different families and different people. So, what is being aimed for in a psychedelic peak experience or entheogenic breakthrough experience, it can vary from here is a Rinpoche dissolving into the rainbow. So he's in a state of meditation where he dissolves into the rainbow light, and his ego disappears, and he's simply flowing rainbow light. And that is one kind of entheogenic peak experience. In a very similar space, in a very similar modality, someone wanting to hold it all together, and not in a bad way, but in an organised way, in a way that this is good. It's good to hold, to flow, to connect, but to hold that space rather than simply dissolve. And this wonderful ancient Aztec statue of Xochipelli, the Prince of Flowers, a god often associated with the entheogens. In fact, it's widely the floral markings on this god are widely interpreted as different kinds of entheogenic plants. He's in an ecstatic state, but he's holding the ecstatic state. He's not necessarily dissolving into the rainbow, although that's not impossible either, but he's very much holding that space. And I think we see this in some of the entheogenic churches as well, that some are more into dissolving into the rainbow light or dissolving into the universe, and others really place a value on sitting and holding the energy as well. So even within the one space, even using very similar materials, people will aim for different effects, and it's very much about their cultural values, whether to hold or to let go. And of course we can't say that one is better than the other or one is more optimal than the other, because it's all about values and what people are working through and what people want and where people are at. So anyway, this I've got an image here of a teepee with members of the Native American Church who use peyote as their sacrament, and they're sitting and they're holding, and they're very much holding the space. The quote there from Quanapaka, who was a very important roadman who helped spread peyotism in North America. The quote there is, "The white man goes into church and talks about Jesus. The Indian goes into his teepee and talks with Jesus." It's the quote. It's a very famous quote of Quanapaka. But there's another aspect that I want to talk about, and it's almost to do with group solidarity and the totem, in a sense, that when a plant teacher embodies the values of a community, it comes to represent the community as well. There's a relationship there where it kind of represents. So the Native American Church can be thought of as a peyote church in some ways, because the state that is achieved during the rites is completely conducive to the values of the people. And similarly with the Bwiti, the whole community sometimes will turn out for an initiation. It's an expression. Initiation into Bwiti can be a collective expression of community solidarity. So the plant it participates in the values, the beliefs of the people using it. And of course, any symbol can function this way. Any symbol can become the totem of the values of a people, the focal point, a symbolic focal point. So quite beyond what it does pharmacologically and what it is as a plant, and even what it is as a plant teacher, it also has a symbolic value. And in the psychology of religion, these are really important parts of the language of religious thought. And when I say religious thought, I'm talking about spiritual experiences, but spiritual experiences that connect individuals, that relate people to each other. So a kind of a cultural system of spirituality. And in the 1960s, cannabis in some ways became this symbol of a people. So the 60s counterculture would smoke, and they valued the laid back, the relaxed, the informal, the connected, the free form. And so cannabis comes to be a symbol of a group of people. So when an outside hostile agency comes along and wants to get rid of the group, it's hardly surprising that they focus on these symbols and ban the symbol. that symbol actually embodies the solidarity of a group, the organic solidarity of a group of people. So it's not just a drug, it's a talisman of what people believe and what people value and what people share. If I were to desecrate a cross outside of a church, I would be in considerable trouble. I'd probably be ripped to pieces or given a stern talking to, certainly disapproved of, and maybe the police would be called. These other symbols like the mushroom, symbols like the peyote, they're illegal. You know, it's like they're totem, but they're taboo. It's a symbolic struggle that we certainly haven't got the upper hand on yet. But I think that the symbolic part of it's really important. So when we sacralize these, and when we own these symbols, because they are symbols as well as being plants and teachers, then we're working in a kind of it's political. It's deeply political, because it is about what we all share and value. And similarly with MDMA in various dance cultures, the sociality, the warmth, the friendliness, the empathy, the relatedness, the equality. These are all values that people have that are very, very important to them. And MDMA comes to be a symbol of those values for that community. And of course it can symbolise many other things besides, but it is also a very important social symbol. Now, returning to the word entheogen, it's an interesting word, and it is historically in a particular place. It is culturally bound in a particular set of kind of straitjackets as well. It's a great word, and it's a politically expedient word, and it's a beautiful word. It is very much a Greek word. It's a word that is a link between the Hellenic and the New Testament kind of spiritualities. So there is a particular cultural context for the word entheogen, and I think we need to be aware of it, even though it's a very useful term. We need to be aware that it's come from a particular worldview of the theos, the God, that can be engendered within us. This is a Hellenic idea of incorporating the divine. And of course, many people have ideas of spirit incorporation. I mean, it's very, very common in Africa and the Egyptians. The idea of incorporating a divinity is widespread. The Greeks certainly had it. Greek possession was very important. The early Christians didn't like some aspects of Greek religion because it was very difficult for the everyday people to have access to oracles who were good at incorporating gods and uttering prophecies. So the Christians actually made a thing about that. They had several diatribes about, well, the good thing about the Christian sacrament is anyone can have it, anyone can commune with Jesus. Whereas in the pagan world, you had to be pretty rich to be able to go to Delphi and get an oracle. So they actually had a bit of a class-conscious, savvy approach there in primitive Christianity to this idea of incorporating the divine. So Entheos is full of God, inspired, and Geneste is to come into being. Now, what's actually happening there? It's a idea that's very well developed amongst the ancient Greeks, but what is it? We are a small part of the divine. We ingest the material, we open up in some other way, and we understand the whole pattern. The divine pattern comes into us. So this is an idea of what happens when we have a psychedelic. It's a religious experience. Does that mean that we connect with God, or we connect with the goddess, or with the plan, the template, the transcendent? But it's a very particular kind of idea. Now, it's not to say that it doesn't occur in many of the entheogenic cultures as well. So here we have, granted, it's a Spanish Christian interpretation of magic mushroom eating, but here we see a god standing behind a person who is eating the mushrooms and manipulating the head. Now, it's a very familiar idea to the European Inquisition, that when people took solanaceous plants in Europe, the nightshades and henbanes, the devil talked to them. So there's a bit of a projection there. It's hard to say what the spiritual conception was. These Christians, the Spanish, saw it as the devil talking for the intermediary plant. The idea of invoking a god for a plant is also developed quite well, theologically quite well developed in India, and particularly amongst extreme practitioners of the left-hand path, these left-hand tantrics. There are cases where people smoke not just ganja in a chilla, but also the most deadly plant, the most poisonous plant on the entire planet, which is this little purple flower here. It's very pretty. It's a very pretty flower, but it is the most poisonous plant on the entire planet. This plant, known in Sanskrit as bish, which simply means poison, is incredibly dangerous. Yet people smoke it, and they smoke it in order to commune with Shiva, the god Shiva. Now, in the creation stories for the physical universe, the gods and the demons, that is to say, the people who sacrificed to each other and the people who demanded sacrifices, the gods and the devas, the devas and the demonic spirits, the asura, yeah. So the devas and the asuras struggling over the milk ocean and producing the universe out of this, and producing the soma and many other good things out of the milk ocean. They were doing this kind of tug-of-war where they're trying to churn the ocean to produce all of these things, including the soma medicine. And it produced a terrible poison. And the universe was going to be destroyed by the poison, except that the god Shiva intervened to save the universe by drinking all of the poison. And his wife Parvati tried to stop him, grabbed him by the throat and tried to basically throttle him so that he wouldn't swallow the poison, turning his throat blue. And this blue is the blue of this flower, the most toxic plant in India, and actually the most toxic plant on the planet. So this absolute supreme poison is something that is associated with Shiva, and in fact he dropped a little bit of poison and it fell on the Himalayas and it grew into this plant, which is psychoactive but incredibly strong and incredibly dangerous. So it's a very, very stern teacher plant. And yet in extreme rituals of identification with the god, this plant is ingested very, very carefully by very advanced tantric practitioners, and it helps them with their identification with the divine. So it is entheogenic in that sense. It comes from a god, it is ingested, and the god and the devotee become closer, they resonate more powerfully. So that's the bish plant. So there's an element of risk involved in smoking the most deadly plant on the planet, and people do die from it. So that aconitum is extraordinarily dangerous. It is certainly psychoactive, but it is a very, very dangerous plant. Even the most minute piece of the leaf can give a pins and needles tingling sensation for the whole day. Ingesting more of that, I'm sure that going through the entire system, through the whole array of nerves, will be appalling, because it's not a pleasant tingling. But it's a kind of a sacrifice, and what people are giving up in that sacrifice is their very mortality. So there are many different things that can be sacrificed. So I've got a picture here. You can't really see them, but these are incense sticks. The smoke is offered to the gods. And here is a lamb. That lamb is going to be offered to a particular god. And here are some people walking across hot coals, and they're sacrificing their fear for some kind of return. So something is sacrificed for some kind of return. And here someone is having an entheogenic experience with hashish, and they're sacrificing their mortality. They are not human for this time. They have given that up. There's something more essential, more special. Not more special, because we are special, but there's something more essential there, something transcendent. And so there's a sacrifice involved. So all of these are different sacrifices. Even was talking about ages, the succession of times, and the kinds of waves of energy. And there are some esoteric traditions that say that each age has had its optimal sacrifice. At different times we've sacrificed different things through the ages. And generally these sacrifices have tended to become more loving and more compassionate. Not necessarily that the consequences of that have been better, but there's been a kind of almost like a sidestepping of the sacrifice. And finding out the sacrifice that's appropriate for each time is very difficult because we don't know yet what the best kind of sacrifice is. The sacrifice of one's mortality is a beautiful sacrifice. And the really wonderful thing about entheogen use is when that mortality is sacrificed, it does come back eventually. Well, perhaps. I mean, it's also quite possible to be in a state where you truly don't believe it will come back, and where perhaps you have been gripped by the divine in such a way that you are actually out of the system. You are no longer... But anyway, but in any case, generally we have this experience that we go through an entheogenic experience. We give up our conception of ourselves as humans. We become more aware of the divine, but it does come back. So it's a reversible sacrifice. It's interesting to see what's produced by that process. So the sacrifice of giving up oneself, dissolving into ecstasy, dissolving into the ocean, being a drop returning to the ocean. It's a very ancient idea. It's certainly well developed in the Vedas. But in the experience of LSD, it's also extremely common. People report just returning to the source of being. It's a sacrifice of a kind. And this is a religious attitude. This is a specifically... I wouldn't reduce this to psychology either. This is religion, but we can call it religious psychology. It actually goes beyond psychology or biology or chemistry. It is a religious thing to return to the source. So we have the plants to thank for these states, these very beautiful sacrifices that we can make, that bring us a lot of growth and a lot of insight and very, very special, very intangible experiences. And what can we give back? Well, one thing we can give back is we can cultivate these plants. We can create spaces for them to be. We can grow them. And here we have a painting called the Corandera, and she is holding medicines, she's holding incense, she's holding earth, she's holding water, and that water is watering plants. So there's a giving back to the world of the plants, cultivating of the plants, and allowing them to be, even if not actively cultivating, just setting aside spaces where they can grow and live and be. In some ways, I think, if this is the beginning, if it's the cusp of the age of Aquarius, well, what better sacrifice for the age of Aquarius than the water bearer who nourishes the plants? That's really all I want to say. Thank you for your attention.
In a few minutes, we're going to get Mitch Schultz up here to do what he does best. Is there any questions in the audience?
Oh, recently, no, it's really difficult. I mean, a lot of the stuff that's been written recently, I haven't had a chance to even read yet. Yeah. I'm not really sure. I mean, I was revisiting Aldous Huxley's stuff, like Brave New World and Heaven and Hell recently, and was really amazed at how that's aged. Just blown away by the insights in Huxley. It's astonishing philosophical perspective. That's probably the most recent thing I read, even though it's decades old. But yeah, no, I'd have to think that one over actually. Yeah. It's yeah. No, Julius, I'll have to get back to you on that one.
No, it is working. It's over here, just so you can get the eye contact. But yeah, I was just wondering what you were talking about with Henchbane and Nightshade and all of that family. Whether or not there's still, if you're aware of practicing knowledge keepers of those plants, because I never really hear about them. And it's a family that I'm really interested in, but never really.
It's a really difficult one. There are people who talk about it. I'm conservative with them because I know what their effects are like. I've had strong experiences with Daturas and Brugmansias, and I just know how hard. Yeah, it's hard and it's dangerous. So I'm really cautious around it. I do see there are a lot of people. YouTube actually has quite a lot of people who get in there and mix up the ointments, and I kind of look at them and shake my head and think, wow. I mean, that's just wild that they would do. You know, like, oh, a handful of this, a handful of that, mix it up in some oil, and so I really don't know. Just start small with anything. Just start really, really small, and smoking is much more safer than other ways of using them.
Way back when, and and I guess most of them have been wiped out. But the main question was whether or not there's actually practicing groups. I know that there's individuals that still dabble, but whether it's
It is definitely still out there, and I think there is actually a lot of hereditary witchcraft that preserves that. So I was talking recently to someone who holds the Mandragora seed collection for Europe. So he actually maintains all the different sources of mandrake, and in that process he's learnt a lot of mandrake lore. He's been contacted by people who still work with mandrake and always have. So it's there. It's there.
Incidentally, I just want to point out, Julie Manning here is one of the organisers and hasn't stopped working all weekend. Thank you, Julie.
Well, I also want to say thanks, Des, for that really informative and informed presentation. I was wondering whether you could say something beyond the note of, the note that there are kinship terms such as madre, ayahuasca, or grandfather peyote within the kinds of entheogens which tend to be used in Australia. Have you got a sense of either other terms or cosmovisions, cosmological stories, etc., that are emerging? Is there a way in which communities that use these entheogens are beginning to think about themselves as part of a continuum with the plants? Is there any indication of that, or are we part of a secular world that doesn't make that kind of transference?
I have been seeing it. I think it's increasingly common. People working with San Pedro referring to it, relating to it as grandfather. That is really, that's getting to be much more common. And because it works, it's a wonderful way to relate to the medicine, to consult grandfather and to be guided by that wisdom. It's a very appropriate kind of kinship archetype for that plant. It's interesting. Beyond that, I'm not sure, but that is, I think, really promising that I see that happening increasingly. Yeah. And yourself, have you seen?
Yeah, people often talk about La Madre Ayahuasca, or rather, I mean, it's interesting that we're using the Spanish to say it. I don't generally experience ayahuasca as a large or a great woman, or even as Gaia. In the end, I experience ayahuasca as some kind of it. It's beyond sex primarily for me. It can have a sexual dimension and also an erotic dimension, but I think it. But I'm not sure whether that's a defense mechanism of mine, or whether I'm pushing through beyond a kind of borrowed cosmology.
That's very interesting, and the it, the impersonal pronoun there is it's interesting. Gender, of course, needs a lot of deconstruction as well. I mean, what is gender? The division into male and female is really quite simplistic, because what are we going on? Are we going on genitalia? Are we going on chromosomes? Are we going on social roles? Are we going on psychological states? Because there are so many different chromosomal forms, there are so many variants of intersex people, that it's, I think it was something like 5% of newborn children, it was actually difficult for doctors to assign gender with confidence in Australia. So 5%, it was hard to assign with confidence. So gender is not as simple as it seems. And there are, of course, intermediate forms. And this is with our species, and we're talking about plants. Plants generally are hermaphrodites. I mean, they usually, they either have the male on one plant and the female on another, or else there's male and female combined on the one plant. Basidiomycetes, like Psilocybe cubensis, I think basidiomycetes have 6 different sexual types, and only one pair of those are ever compatible. So when a spore hatches and sends out a mycelium, it might meet 5 different other mycelium spores that are germinating before it finds a sexually compatible partner, because it's got 6 sexes, not 2. So when we talk about gender and try to bring them into human kinship terms, it's difficult. But a lot of kinship terms are actually binary, but there it's confusing too. If you're a matrilineal descent group or a patrilineal descent group, you don't necessarily recognise the same people as kin. If you're a bilineal descent group, you've got a lot more relatives. The whole thing is, I think it's a way for us to interface, a way for us to relate, and I think to see these things as not fitting into our conception there's a wisdom to that, and there's also a utility to bringing them into our world as well. So there's
I've got a question here. She wants to know the name of the flower once again.
This is Ipomaea. It used to be called Ipomaea violacea. It's now called Ipomaea tricolour. In horticulture, it's known as both. And so it's the heavenly blue, which is a blue form of Ipomaea tricolour. There are also white and pink forms. Heavenly blue is a cultivar that has this really special colour.
Well done. We'll ask if there's any more questions. And that looks like it's a wrap. I'll hand over to Mitch Schultz in just a few minutes, kids. Thank you. And thank you, guys, for asking.